My name is Arthur, and for 42 years, I drove a truck. Not the big 18-wheelers that thunder down the interstates, but a sturdy, honest pickup. The kind a man uses to build a life. That truck and I, we hauled lumber for the house I built. We brought my daughter Clara home from the hospital, and we carried my son, David, to his first day of school. My wife, Eleanor, used to say that the truck had more stories in its dents and scratches than most people had in their whole lives. She's been gone 5 years now, and sometimes, sitting in that worn driver's seat, I could almost feel her there beside me, her hand resting on the dashboard. The truck was old, sure. It groaned when it started on cold mornings, and the paint was faded by decades of sun and work, but it was mine. It was a part of me, a testament to a life of labor, of providing, of keeping promises. My son, David, he was different. He was my pride, but he was a different kind of man. I'd worked my fingers to the bone so he wouldn't have to. I wanted him to have the clean hands, the sharp suit, the office with a view. And he got it. He was a financial advisor, climbing the ladder at a prestigious firm in the city. He married Jessica, a woman from a family whose money was as old as my truck. They lived in a world I only saw in magazines, a world of catered parties and silent, knowing judgments. I was proud of his success, truly I was. But somewhere along the way, my boy had started to look at his own roots as if they were a stain he needed to scrub out. When he visited, his eyes would scan my small, tidy home with a flicker of something. Not quite pity, but a close cousin. Embarrassment. The call came on a Tuesday. David was on the brink of a major promotion, a full partnership. It all hinged on a weekend retreat at a lake house with his boss, a man named Mr. Thompson. "Dad, I need you to be there," he said, his voice tight with an anxiety I knew well. "It's a family thing. Jessica's parents will be there. It's important they see a united front." He needed me, but it felt less like an invitation and more like a summons for a character witness. He also needed a favor. There were errands to run, supplies to pick up from a town 20 miles from the fancy lake house. He asked if I could drive up with him, use my truck for the hauling. "My sedan can't handle all that stuff," he'd explained. Of course I said yes. A father says yes. That is the job. The day we were to leave, I had the old Ford gleaming. I'd washed and waxed it, cleaned the interior, made it look as respectable as a 20-year-old workhorse could. When David arrived, he barely glanced at it. He just threw his expensive leather duffel bag in the bed and said, "Let's get this over with." The drive was mostly silent. He was on his phone, typing furiously, a muscle jumping in his jaw. I tried to make small talk about the changing leaves, about a new engine part I'd found for the truck, but his answers were clipped, his attention 1,000 miles away in a boardroom I couldn't imagine. We were just pulling into a gas station on the main highway, the last stop before the turnoff to the lake, when it happened. As I was guiding my truck toward the pump, a sleek, silver Mercedes glided in on the other side. Behind the wheel was a man with a confident, easy smile. Mr. Thompson, David's boss. He and his wife got out, and David's entire posture changed. He straightened up, a broad, artificial smile plastered on his face. "Richard, what a surprise," he boomed, his voice a full octave higher than usual. He introduced them to me with a wave of his hand. "This is my father, Arthur." It was a dismissal, not an introduction. Mr. Thompson, to his credit, was polite. He looked at my truck, then at me. "Arthur," he said, extending a hand. "That's a fine old vehicle you've got. They don't make them like that anymore. But it has some stories." I saw the flash of panic in David's eyes. He let out a short, sharp laugh that didn't sound like him at all. "Oh, this old thing," he said, kicking one of my tires with his polished shoe. The sound of it, that casual act of contempt, echoed in the sudden quiet of the gas station. "It's a relic, an absolute piece of junk. Dad here, he can't seem to let go of the past. Honestly, it's a bit embarrassing. I keep telling him to just scrap it and get something decent, but you know how they are," he said it loudly. He wanted them to hear. He wanted them to know that he wasn't like me, that my truck, my life, my values were not his. The words didn't just hang in the air, they pierced me. It felt like a physical blow, a shard of glass sliding right between my ribs. He wasn't talking about the truck. He was talking about me. I was the junk. I was the relic. I was the embarrassment he was desperate to scrap. In that moment, the world went fuzzy at the edges. The smell of gasoline, the hum of the pumps, the murmur of other customers, it all faded into a dull, distant roar. All I could feel was a profound and terrible coldness spreading through my chest. It was the cold of invisibility. I looked at my son, saw his desperate, smiling face turned toward his boss, and I realized I wasn't his father anymore. I was a prop, a shabby, inconvenient piece of his past that he had to apologize for. The shame wasn't mine, it was his. But he was projecting it onto me, trying to burn it off his own skin by setting me on fire. My heart, a sturdy old engine that had powered me through decades of hardship, seemed to seize. I did not say a word. I did not yell. I did not make a scene. My body moved on instinct, carrying on as if nothing had happened. I turned away from the three of them, from my son's bright, false smile, and uncapped the gas tank. My hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly as I inserted the nozzle. I focused on the numbers ticking over on the pump, watching the gallons and the dollars climb. It was something real, something tangible in a moment that felt like it was dissolving into smoke. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing the wound. I would not let his boss, or his boss's wife, see the look on my face. My dignity was all I had left, and I wrapped it around myself like a winter coat. As I was swiping my card to pay, I caught the eye of Mr. Thompson's wife. She was a woman of a certain age, elegant, with kind eyes that were now filled with an expression I couldn't quite place. It wasn't pity. It was something closer to solidarity. She looked from me to David, who was still laughing about something with her husband, and she gave me the slightest, most subtle shake of her head. It was a gesture that lasted no more than a second, but it was a lifeline thrown across a chasm of humiliation. It said, "I see you." I heard what he said, and it was not right. In that small, silent exchange, a stranger gave me back a piece of the respect my own son had just stripped away. Walking back from the cashier, a decision began to form inside me. It wasn't born of rage or a desire for revenge. It was quieter than that. It was the cold, hard clarity that comes after a deep shock. It was the realization that I had spent my entire life absorbing blows for my children, making myself smaller so they could stand taller. I had let David's casual disrespect slide for years, telling myself it was just his ambition, his stress. But this was different. This was a public execution of my worth. He had called my life, my work, my very essence, junk, and a man, once he accepts that label from his own child, ceases to be a man at all. He becomes a ghost. I would not become a ghost. David was still deep in conversation, his back to me. He was performing, spinning a version of himself he thought these wealthy people wanted to see. He gestured vaguely toward the truck, probably telling them he'd be right with them after his embarrassing father finished the errand. I didn't wait for his signal. I didn't ask for his permission. I opened the driver's side door, the familiar creak a comforting sound in the sudden stillness of my mind. I slid onto the worn vinyl seat that had molded itself to my shape over thousands of miles. I put the key in the ignition. My actions were slow, deliberate, each one a separate, conscious choice. I turned the key. The old V8 engine, loyal and true, rumbled to life with a cough and then settled into its steady, powerful idle. The sound cut through the air. David turned, his smile faltering as he saw me behind the wheel. His expression shifted from confusion to irritation. He made a sharp, jerky gesture with his hand, a wait-a-minute command. I ignored it. I put the truck into drive, my hand steady on the gear shift. I did not look at him again. I did not look at the Thompsons. I looked straight ahead, through the windshield that had framed my view of the world for 2 decades. I pulled away from the pump, rolled past the convenience store, and steered my truck out of the gas station, leaving my son standing there, his mouth agape, stranded by the very piece of junk he so despised. In my rearview mirror, I saw him for a fleeting second, a shrinking figure with his hands on his hips, watching the silver Mercedes pull away in the opposite direction. He was utterly, completely alone. My phone began to ring before I had even merged back onto the highway. It was David. I let it ring, the shrill sound and accusation in the quiet cab of my truck. It stopped, then immediately started again. I drove for another hour, heading not toward the lake, but back toward home. Back toward myself. The farther I drove, the lighter I felt. The cold knot in my chest began to loosen, replaced by a strange, quiet calm. Finally, I pulled over onto the gravel shoulder of a quiet country road and answered. His voice was a torrent of rage. What the hell was that? Have you completely lost your mind? You just left me there. You drove off and left me at a gas station like a piece of trash. The irony of his words was so thick, it was almost funny. He was yelling, his voice cracking with a mix of fury and disbelief. You embarrassed me, he shouted, the words tumbling over each other. You deliberately, publicly humiliated me in front of my boss. What is wrong with you? Is this some kind of sick, pathetic game? Are you trying to ruin my entire career because you're jealous of my success? He wasn't asking for an explanation. He was delivering a verdict. In his mind, I was the aggressor. I was the one who had behaved badly. There was not a single ounce of remorse in his voice, only the hot, wounded pride of a man whose performance had been interrupted. I let him burn himself out. I listened to the accusations, the insults, the self-pitying tirade, and I said nothing. I just held the phone to my ear and listened to the sound of the sun I had raised. When he finally paused to take a breath, his fury exhausted, I spoke. My voice was low and even, stripped of all emotion. David, I said, you were embarrassed. You were right about that. You were embarrassed by me. By my truck. You called it junk. I let the words hang there. I could hear his sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. A man who's stranded without a ride. He just needs to find another way home. I continued, my voice as steady as the old engine idling beside me. It's an inconvenience. But a man who has no respect for where he comes from, he's already lost. He has nothing. You'll find your way back, David. You're a resourceful man. And with that, I ended the call. I turned the phone off completely and placed it on the seat beside me. The silence that filled the cab was profound. It was the sound of a chain breaking. A few days passed in blessed quiet. I didn't hear from David or his wife. The silence was a relief. Then, on Friday, my daughter Clara called. Her voice was gentle, worried. Jessica had called her, hysterical, demanding to know what had happened. Clara had gotten the whole ugly story, at least David's version of it. Dad, she said, and I could hear the tears in her voice. I am so sorry. I'm sorry he did that to you. He had no right. She didn't question my actions. She didn't tell me I should have handled it differently. She just said, what you did leaving him there. I understand. I really do. Hearing those words from her, that simple, unconditional validation, felt like a cool cloth on a burn. It was the knowledge that at least one of my children still saw me. The incident had stirred something in me. I started spending all my time in the garage. David's words, relic, junk, kept echoing in my head. He had tried to discard my history, so I decided to reclaim it. I wasn't just going to fix the old truck. I was going to restore it. I started a complete, frame-off restoration. I pulled the engine, took the body off the chassis, and began the slow, painstaking process of bringing every single piece back to life. Sanding away the rust felt like sanding away years of small slights and quiet hurts. Each coat of primer, each layer of deep blue paint, was an act of defiance. The garage became my sanctuary, the scent of oil and metal polish the air I breathed. My hands, which David saw as symbols of a lowly past, were building something beautiful again. They were creating, not just consuming. When the work was finally done, months later, the truck was magnificent. It looked better than it had the day I drove it off the lot. The chrome gleamed, the engine purred like a contented cat, and the new paint was as deep as a midnight sky. It wasn't a relic anymore. It was a resurrection. I took the original key, the one worn smooth by my own hand, rusted and bent from years of use, and I placed it in a small, glass-fronted shadow box. Alongside it, I put a faded photograph of me and Eleanor, young and smiling, standing proudly beside the new truck all those years ago. I hung the box on the wall above my mantelpiece. It was a monument, not to a machine, but to endurance, to loyalty, to the things that last. News of David's life trickled in through Clara. The partnership at his firm had quietly gone to someone else. She'd heard, through a friend of a friend, that Mr. Thompson had been deeply unimpressed by the incident at the gas station. He had apparently told one of the other partners, "A man who doesn't respect his own father can't be trusted to respect his clients." It was a simple, devastating judgment. The foundation of David's carefully constructed world had developed a crack. His marriage, already strained by his ambition, began to crumble under the weight of his failure. Jessica was furious, not about his cruelty to me, but about the social and financial cost of his mistake. One Saturday afternoon, months after the gas station, a car I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. It was David. He looked different. The sharp confidence was gone, replaced by a weary, hollowed-out look. He stood on my porch for a long moment before knocking. I let him in. He offered a stilted apology, his eyes scanning the room, never quite meeting mine. "Dad, I'm sorry," he mumbled. "I messed up. I know that. That promotion, it was everything. Now, with the partnership gone, Jessica is talking about leaving. He wasn't there for forgiveness. He was there because his world was collapsing, and he was looking for a foundation to stand on. He was looking for a bailout, a comforting word, a solution. He was still looking to me to fix what he had broken. I didn't offer him any of it. I didn't give him sympathy or an easy absolution. I just listened, and when he was finished, I nodded toward the mantelpiece. "Look at that," I said, my voice quiet. He turned and saw the shadow box. He stepped closer, peering at the old key and the faded photograph. "That key," I told him, "started that truck more times than I can count. Through blizzards, through heat waves, through every single hard day. It never failed me. It represents loyalty, David. It represents showing up. That is all I ever gave you. And that is all I ever wanted back." He stared at the box, at the tangible evidence of a life he had tried to mock. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I saw a flicker of something real in his eyes. Not anger, not self-pity, but a deep, gut-wrenching shame. He turned without a word and walked out of my house. A week later, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was short, stark, and free of excuses. "You were right. I was wrong. I'm sorry for how I treated you." I found a peace I hadn't realized I'd lost. My days settled into a comfortable rhythm. The garage was my haven, the restored truck my companion. I reconnected with old friends, men who understood the language of calloused hands and honest work. I spent weekends with Clara and her family, no longer feeling like I was on borrowed time, waiting for David's next crisis or command. My life felt like my own again, its value determined not by my son's approval, but by my own sense of self. I was no longer a supporting character in his story. I was the protagonist of mine. My greatest joy became my grandson, Leo. He was Clara's boy, 7 years old, with eyes full of wonder. He adored the truck. To him, it wasn't old, it was classic. It wasn't a symbol of a humble past, it was an adventure machine. I'd take him for drives down winding country roads, his small body bouncing on the newly upholstered seat, a huge grin on his face. One sunny afternoon, as we were parked by a creek, he turned to me. "Grandpa," he said with the solemn gravity only a child can muster, "your truck is the coolest car in the whole world. You're like a hero, fixing it all up," in his simple, honest words. I found the validation that had eluded me for so long. He didn't know the story of the gas station, the humiliation, the long drive home. He just saw the truth. He saw the love and the labor, and he called it heroic. That was my legacy, not the money I'd saved or the success of my son, but this pure, unconditional love, passed down to a new generation. I looked down at my hands on the steering wheel, the knuckles still a bit swollen, the skin creased with lines like a road map of my life. They weren't the hands of a wealthy man, but they were the hands that had built a home, raised a family, and, in the end, restored my own broken spirit. You can't buy that kind of repair in a store. You have to earn it, piece by painful piece. A person who tries to bury their own roots, who paves over their past in the desperate hope of building a shinier future, eventually discovers they're standing on nothing but hollow ground. I don't know what will ultimately become of David. His journey is his own now, a long road back to himself that he has to travel alone. Maybe that text was the first step. Maybe not. It no longer consumes me. My road is here, in this town, behind the wheel of this beautiful old truck, with the laughter of my grandson beside me. The engine of my life is running smoothly again. And for the first time in a very long time, I feel like I'm heading in the right direction, finally and completely home.